Most men think silence is power. They believe that if they disappear long enough, she'll miss them, regret leaving, and come running back. But that kind of silence doesn't come from strength. It comes from pain. It comes from a wounded ego that doesn't know how to handle rejection. When you go silent without healing, you're not showing power, you're showing avoidance. You're trying to escape the discomfort of facing what went wrong, hoping time will do the work that maturity should. But silence built on hurt doesn't inspire curiosity, it reveals confusion. Because when your silence is driven by emotion, she can still feel that energy. She knows you're quiet, but she also knows you're still waiting. And waiting is not strength, it's emotional dependency disguised as self-control. If you really want her to come back, disappearing isn't the way. The truth is, silence often makes things worse. It gives her space to reinforce her decision, to adjust to your absence, to find peace without you. While you're busy pretending not to care, she's learning how to live without you. And once a woman learns peace in your silence, she no longer misses the noise you used to bring. That's why most men lose the moment they go quiet, not because silence is wrong, but because they use it wrong. They use it to manipulate, not to mature. Real power doesn't come from avoiding communication, it comes from mastering it. You don't have to beg, chase, or plead, but you do have to be honest with her and with yourself. If something is broken, acknowledge it. If you still have feelings, express them with calmness, not chaos. A man who can communicate clearly without losing control shows more power than the one who hides behind pride. Because silence might look strong, but it's easy to be quiet when you're scared to speak. The real strength is in facing what hurts and doing it with dignity. When you stay silent, she doesn't see your strength, she sees your uncertainty. She sees a man who doesn't know how to lead with truth. And no woman feels drawn to confusion. If you truly want her to reconsider, she must see a version of you that is learned, not withdrawn. Silence can't show that, but maturity can. She needs to feel the shift in your energy, your words, your calm presence. That's what breaks her assumption. That's what makes her stop and think, he's not the same man anymore. You don't rebuild connection by running from it. You rebuild it by facing it, by communicating with control, confidence, and clarity. Because if you're still broken inside, your silence only echoes your pain. But when you start healing, your words carry peace, and peace is what every woman feels drawn to again. Silence hides fear, but truth reveals transformation, and only transformation makes her want to come back. Silence doesn't build connection, it breaks it. You can't expect a woman to come back when your absence only reminds her of the emotional distance that already existed. When you go quiet, hoping she'll chase you, you're reinforcing the very reason she pulled away in the first place, the lack of real emotional connection. Relationships are built on communication, on understanding, on emotional presence. When you remove that, you don't create mystery, you create emptiness. And emptiness doesn't attract anyone back, it only deepens the space between you. A woman doesn't miss silence, she misses feeling understood, appreciated, and emotionally safe. If she left, it's not because she didn't hear your words, it's because your words stopped having meaning. You can't make her feel your value by disappearing. She has to feel it when you're present. That's what most men forget. They think distance equals desire, but it doesn't. Desire grows from connection, not absence. If she doesn't feel emotionally connected to you, your silence only confirms that her decision to walk away was right. Communication doesn't mean begging. It doesn't mean chasing or convincing. It means showing maturity through clarity. When you express yourself with calmness instead of desperation, you show her that you're not controlled by emotion anymore. You're guided by understanding. Women feel safety in that kind of energy. Because when a man communicates from peace, not pain, she listens differently. She starts to sense a change, not in what you say, but in how you say it. That's what reignites her respect. Your silence might make her wonder for a moment, but your composure and conversation makes her rethink everything. Because silence fades quickly, but emotional connection lingers. When you're brave enough to express what you feel with control, she starts to see a version of you that's grounded, not reactive. You're not trying to get her attention. You're showing her you've evolved. You're no longer afraid to speak because your self-worth doesn't depend on her reaction anymore. That kind of presence speaks louder than any silence ever could. The truth is, when communication comes from authenticity, it rebuilds trust. It reminds her of the emotional foundation that once existed between you. Even if she's distant, she notices the difference in your energy. You're not chasing, you're leading with emotional intelligence. You're creating an environment where connection can exist again without pressure or games. And that's what draws her closer, not manipulation, but maturity. So if you really want her to come back, don't go silent. Speak with strength. Don't speak to prove, speak to connect. Don't speak to change her mind, speak to show your growth. Because communication, rooted in calm confidence, builds bridges that silence will never create. The goal isn't to make her miss you. It's to remind her that what you offer can't be replaced. Silence makes her forget your presence, but true communication makes her remember your value. And that's the only way she'll ever come back. Most men confuse communication with weakness. They think that speaking up, expressing how they feel, or addressing the truth means losing power. But that belief comes from insecurity, not confidence. Silence feels safer because it hides vulnerability, but it also hides strength. When you go quiet to look strong, what you're really doing is protecting your ego. Real maturity isn't about who can stay silent the longest. It's about who can communicate without falling apart. You don't need to beg, you don't need to convince, and you don't need to chase. You just need to speak with calmness, with presence, with purpose. Because when a man can express his emotions without losing his control, he becomes unforgettable. A woman doesn't respect a man because he says nothing. She respects the man who can say something meaningful without desperation. When you go silent after she pulls away, she doesn't feel your power, she feels your confusion. But when you're calm enough to express your truth, even when you've been hurt, that's when she feels your emotional strength. You're not trying to manipulate her, you're showing her you understand yourself. You're not arguing for validation, you're speaking from peace. That difference is what separates a boy from a man. Maturity means you can express without expectation. It's not about saying the perfect words to get her back. It's about being real, honest, and composed regardless of the outcome. When you tell her how you feel, you're not doing it to change her decision. You're doing it because you value truth more than pride. That's what real men do. They don't hide behind silence pretending not to care. They communicate with integrity and then step back with peace. That kind of energy always leaves a mark, even on someone who thinks they've moved on. Because here's the truth. A woman can forget what you said, but she'll never forget how you said it. If you spoke from anger, she'll remember the chaos, but if you spoke from calm, grounded confidence, she'll remember the peace. Your tone, your composure, your control, those things linger. That's what makes her replay the conversation in her mind long after it's over. You can't make her rethink everything through maturity. Don't mistake communication for weakness. The strongest men aren't the ones who hide their emotions. They're the ones who master them. It takes courage to speak when you could stay silent. It takes power to stay calm when your heart wants to explode. It takes wisdom to know that expression doesn't mean attachment, it means freedom. And that freedom is what creates lasting respect. So if you really want her to see the man you become, don't disappear. Show her your growth through composure. Speak with strength, not need. Express without pressure. Because silence hides who you are, but mature communication reveals what you become. And that's what makes her look back and realize she walked away from something real. If you really want her to come back, your silence won't show her that you've changed. Your growth will. Silence hides transformation, but maturity reveals it. A woman doesn't fall for the man who disappears. She falls for the man who evolves. If you think that by ignoring her, you'll suddenly become more attractive, you're missing the point. She's not drawn to mystery. She's drawn to progress. She's attracted to emotional stability, confidence, and consistency. And none of those things can be shown through silence alone. Growth needs to be seen, not just felt. It's the shift in your presence, the calmness in your tone, and the peace in your actions that make her notice something's different. Most men make the mistake of thinking that distance alone will do the work. They think going quiet will create curiosity, but it rarely does. Because when you go silent without changing anything, you're still the same person she walked away from, just quieter. She doesn't feel your transformation because there hasn't been one. Time apart means nothing if you're still carrying the same pain, same patterns, and same emotional immaturity. Silence might give her space, but only growth gives her a reason to look back. When a man genuinely evolves, he doesn't need to announce it. His energy speaks for him. He doesn't post quotes about self-worth, doesn't try to show off peace. He lives it. She'll notice it in the way you no longer react to things that used to bother you, and how you listen more and argue less, and how you're no longer chasing approval because you've found contentment within yourself. That's what shakes her perception, because when you change your behavior, you change how she sees you. You go from being emotionally dependent to emotionally disciplined. You go from trying to prove your value to simply embodying it. And that's when she begins to feel it, not through your words, not through your absence, but through your evolution. Growth is magnetic. It draws attention without trying. When she sees that your life didn't fall apart without her, when she sees you've become calmer, sharper, and more focused, her ego starts to question what it lost. That's the kind of energy that draws people back, not silence, but transformation. So don't hide behind distance. Use that distance to evolve. Focus on your health, your peace, your goals, your mindset. Build a life that commands respect, not because you want her to see it, but because it's who you are now. When your silence turns into progress. When your absence turns into purpose. That's when she feels it, because the man she remembers is gone, replaced by one who's stronger, wiser, and more grounded. Silence doesn't show growth, change does. And when she sees that growth, that's when your silence finally starts to speak for you. Detachment isn't about walking away. It's about how you carry yourself when you stay. Too many men think distance equals strength, that silence equals control, but disappearing doesn't prove you detached. It only shows you're afraid to face your emotions. Real detachment isn't found in distance. It's found in composure, when you can look her in the eye, speak calmly, and not let her behavior shake your peace. That's when she starts to feel something different, because women don't respond to men who withdraw. They respond to men who remain unshaken. When you go silent to prove a point, you're still reacting. You're still operating from emotion, from pride, from pain. But when you choose to stay calm, speak less, and act with control, you're showing real strength. You're showing that you're not trying to win her approval. You've already won your own. That's the kind of confidence she can't ignore, because emotional control creates attraction far stronger than distance ever could. Attachment through composure means you don't overreact when she pulls away. You don't chase when she goes cold. You don't get angry when she tests your patience. You stay centered, you keep your standards, your boundaries, your peace. You show her through your actions that your emotions no longer depend on her decisions. That's the moment she begins to notice the change. Not because you're gone, but because you've grown. You've stopped playing emotional tug of war and started mastering yourself. And that calmness makes her curious again. Because silence often feels like punishment, but composure feels like mystery. Silence says, I'm upset, but composure says, I'm in control. One pushes her away, the other pulls her closer. Women respect men who can stay kind and collected under pressure. That doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you guide them. You no longer react out of pain. You respond with purpose. That energy shifts the entire dynamic between you and her. Instead of seeing you as emotional or unpredictable, she starts seeing you as grounded, balanced, and strong. When you show composure instead of distance, you take back your emotional power. You're no longer a slave to the situation. You can speak without attachment, love without fear, and walk away without bitterness. That's real detachment, because true confidence isn't built by ignoring her, it's built by understanding yourself. When you master your emotions, you become the man who can't be easily replaced. So don't confuse detachment with disappearing. Don't think silence will earn you respect. It won't. But calm, consistent composure will. Because she doesn't miss you when you're gone. She misses the version of you that's no longer emotionally available in the same way. The man who once overreacted now responds with peace. The man who once begged now breathes. And when she sees that shift, your presence begins to affect her more than your silence ever could. If you really want her to come back, understand this real attraction isn't built through silence. It's rebuilt through leadership. A woman feels safe and drawn to a man who knows where he's going, who moves with direction, purpose, and self-control. When you go silent, you're not leading, you're hiding. You're stepping back from responsibility, from communication, from emotional courage. And no woman is inspired by a man who retreats when things get tough. What touches her, what earns her respect, again, is when she sees you taking charge of your own life, moving forward with confidence, not to prove something to her, but to become who you were meant to be. Leadership doesn't mean chasing her or forcing conversations. It means guiding the energy, setting the tone, and standing firm in your values even when emotions are high. It's how you handle conflict, how you respond when she tests your patience, how you stay calm when things don't go your way. When a woman sees you maintain your peace instead of losing control, when she sees you communicate with strength instead of pride, that's when she feels something shift, because true leadership is quiet power. It doesn't need validation, it earns it naturally. A man who leads from self-awareness doesn't let silence define him. He uses clarity and direction to rebuild respect. Instead of playing games, he brings honesty. Instead of reacting to her moods, he stands steady in his own. That emotional stability draws her in far more than disappearing ever will. When she sees you're no longer moved by fear, but by focus, she starts to remember why she was drawn to you in the first place. Because leadership makes her feel something she can't easily explain, a sense of trust. And here's the truth. A woman can ignore silence, but she can't ignore strength. She can overlook your absence, but she can't unsee your evolution. When you show that you're no longer the man chasing closure, no longer trying to prove your worth through reaction or revenge, she begins to question everything. That's when curiosity is reborn, not because you're trying to impress her, but because you've stepped into alignment with yourself. Leadership means taking ownership of your life, your emotions, and your growth. It means you stop waiting for her to see your value and start living in a way that reflects it. You invest in your purpose, your health, your mindset, and your goals, not to win her back, but to rise higher than the version of yourself that lost her. And that's exactly what creates attraction again. The power of transformation guided by self-leadership. So don't use silence as a weapon. Use growth as your message. Let your calmness speak louder than words, your direction louder than absence. Because when you step into that kind of leadership, you don't need to chase her. Your presence starts to lead her back naturally.